Bop. Mm. I am honestly just trying to stay awake because went to the airport, picked my sister up from the airport, and I'm guessing this is him. Yeah, yeah. Dang, bro, you don't want to open right here, bro. Dang, okay, it's Huh. I had just clicked on this for the image. The new study revolves around brain cells called neurons that fire to transmit electrical signals and encode memories. Okay. Okay. That's pretty interesting, huh? So you've got an event happening somewhere in the brain. And if that event, and to tag that event to be saved and replayable in the hippocampus, there are these shouts, these sharp wave ripples. Um, I guess it happens once, right? to tag that thing, and then happens a few times. Hold on. While past studies had linked ripples with memory formation during sleep, the new study found that daytime events followed immediately by 5 to 20 sharp wave ripples. Okay. Events followed by very few or no sharp wave ripples failed to form lasting memories. So there's an event somewhere in the brain, and then the hippocampus shouts 5 to 20 times, more than at least 5 times. And when that happens, that other event is somehow tagged. But huh. Humans and other mammals experience the world for a few moments, then pause, then experience a little more, then pause again. Wow, I didn't know about these idle pauses at all. This is great. The current study found this. What are they called? Sharp wave what? Um, Apparently they did not fire the ripples. What am I trying to say? To enforce. Or whatever. Anyway, we learned something. That's cool. Okay. All right. So let's turn on the light and read this. No. Oh. Okay, let's do it. Chapter 6, page 99. The social psychological narrative, or what is social psychology anyway? By Timothy D. Wilson. The Cheryl J. Aston Professor of Psychology at the University of Virginia, author of Strangers to Ourselves and Redirect. Introduction by Daniel Gilbert, the happiness researcher that we saw earlier with affective forecasting. Psychology has always had a love hate relationship with the unconscious, but mainly hate. The unconscious mind was the cornerstone of Freud's theories about the mind, but William James expressed the views of many early 20th century scientists when he referred to it as the sovereign means for believing what one likes in psychology, and for turning what might become a science into a tumbling ground for whimsies. James's antipathy was contagious, and his arguments won the day. The unconscious was banished to psychology's basement for more than half a century. But in the mid 1970s, Tim Wilson and Richard Nisbet, what did Nisbet write? He's written a couple things, and I should have something by him, but I can't think of. He did stuff in economics, behavioral economics, right? Anyway. But in the mid 1970s, Tim Wilson and Dick Nisbet opened the basement door with their landmark paper entitled Telling More Than We Can Know, in which they reported a series of experiments showing that people are often unaware of the true causes of their own actions. And that when they are asked to explain those actions, what? They say, I don't know, or or uh, what do you think? They simply make stuff up. What? They're like lying? Why are they doing that? People don't realize they are making stuff up, of course. They truly believe the stories they are telling about why they did what they did. But as the experiments showed, people are telling more than they can know. The basement door was opened by experimental evidence, and the unconscious took up permanent residence in the living room. Today, psychological science is rife with research showing the extraordinary power of unconscious mental processes. If liberating the unconscious had been Wilson's only contribution to psychological science, it would have been enough. But it was just the start. Wilson has since discovered and documented a variety of fascinating ways in which all of us are strangers to ourselves, which also happens to be the title of his last book, a book that Malcolm Gladwell, writing in The New Yorker, correctly called the best popular psychology book published in the last 20 years. Huh. It's a pretty big deal. I'm just confused because these are seems like two titles about the same thing. What's is this a psych neuro book? It is, right? No, this is about mental illness. I mean, yes, psychology, but oh, unsettled minds. Okay. Because even also settled minds have are made up of stories. Okay. Only 250 pages. All right. 2004. That's a long time ago. We probably have all this information. Timothy D. Wilson wrote, "We are what we do," and this explains everything. And I think I have a video. Oh, I read that. Anyway, my fellow risers. Back to it. He has done brilliant research on topics ranging from reasons analysis. It turns out that when people are asked to generate reasons for their decisions, they typically make bad ones. So hey, you gotta decide this and just you know give or explain to me why you're gonna make that decision. And like, oh, okay, well, I'm gonna do it for this, blah 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 blah, and then they make the decision or they execute the decision, and turns out that it was bad. Probably because most of well, yeah, because most of the processes that our decisions depend on are unconscious, and so if you go, oh, I have to justify it, so I better have a decision that I can justify with language and processes, conscious processes, quote unquote, not really, processes that are connected to language basically, and processes that yeah, that or reasons that, all right, let's give an example. You're walking down the street at night. Um, Now, let's see. We can do this well. All right. You're walking down the sidewalk. You're looking at your phone. And you're laughing, talking to your boyfriend. A car kind of slowly drives past you. You don't even look up. You don't notice it. There are mechanisms, there are parts of you notice it, but most of you is focused on the conversation. And so we can say that you are not conscious of the car passing. In fact, if anyone said, "Did you see a slow car passing?" you'd go, I don't think so, but it would feel vaguely familiar. So then maybe those unconscious processes that had seen it would start to speak up and go and turn the head to look that way. You go, no, I didn't see it. Oh yeah, I guess that car. I don't know. That car might have been kind of slow. Anyway, but nobody asks you. So you're looking at your phone. Car passes slowly. Doesn't seem like a big enough deal for the little mechanisms that notice it to alert the rest of the mechanisms. And that car stops and turns off its lights and nobody gets out. Again, you see this in your periphery, but if anybody asks you about it, you'd be like, I don't know what you're talking about. But there are mechanisms within you that notice this. Let's say your friend. Okay, you know what? You're walking with your boyfriend and you guys are having a nice time. You're laughing, blah, 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 blah. And your boyfriend says, "Oh, so where are we going again? Should we cross the street now?" And you say, "Yeah, let's go over that way now. Let's go that way now, whatever." So you could keep going, in which case you're going to walk right by the stopped car. Or maybe you cross the street now and go left now and then, whatever. You understand? Okay. So you go, let's go now. And he goes, but why? Actually, because we might as well just keep going down here and then turn left, at the end of the block. No sense in turning now and then turning again, right? And so now you have to justify it. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah. And you're kind of searching, and you didn't really have we don't really know what the reason was that you were so inclined to cross the street now and go that other way. Um, and so, okay, yeah, I got nothing. Let's keep going, bro. Okay, that took a long time, but I feel like that's a good example, to be honest with you. Anyway, so Wilson has done brilliant research on topics ranging from reasons analysis. It turns out that when people are asked to generate reasons for their decisions, they typically make bad ones. I don't think they're talking about making bad reasons. It's not about making bad decisions, right? 2, affective forecasting. It turns out that people can't predict how future events will make them feel. But at the center of all his work lies a single enigmatic insight. We seem to know less about the worlds inside our heads than about the world our heads are inside. The Torah asks this question: Is not a flower a mystery no flower can explain? Some scholars have said yes, some scholars have said no. Wilson has said, let's go find out. He has always worn two professional hats: the hat of the psychologist and the hat of the methodologist. He has written extensively about the importance of using experimental methods to solve real-world problems. And in his work on the science of psychological change, he uses a scientific flashlight to chase away a whole host of shadows by examining the many ways in which human beings try to change themselves, from self-help to psychotherapy, and asks whether these things really work, and if so, why. His answers will surprise many people and piss off the rest. I predict that this new work will be the center of a very interesting storm. Questions that so now it's Wilson here speaking from now on. Okay, that was the editor John Brockman talking. Now it's Wilson. Questions that I have asked myself throughout my career are largely ones about self knowledge and the role of the conscious mind versus unconsciousness, the limits of introspection, and the problems of introspection. For example, how it can sometimes get us into trouble to think too much about why we're doing what we're doing. These are questions I began asking in graduate school with my graduate advisor, Dick Nisbet, and they have concerned me ever since. Self-knowledge, limits of introspection, and then get us into trouble, think too much about why we're doing what we're doing. There has been a question lurking in the back of my mind for all those years, which is how can we take this basic knowledge and use it to solve problems of today? I grew up in the turbulent 1960s, in an era when it seemed like the whole world was changing and that we could have a hand in changing it. Part of my reason for studying psychology in the first place was because I felt that this was something that could help solve social problems. In graduate school and beyond, I fell in love with basic research, which is still my first love. It is thrilling to investigate basic questions of self knowledge and consciousness and unconsciousness. But as those other, more applied questions have continued to rattle around and recently come to the fore, the more I realize how much social psychology has to offer. One of the basic assumptions of the field is that it's not the objective environment that influences people, but their constructs of the world. You have to get inside people's heads and see the world the way they do. You have to look at the kinds of narratives. You have to look at the kinds of narratives and stories people tell themselves as to why they're doing what they're doing. What can get people into trouble sometimes in their personal lives, or for more societal problems, is that these stories go wrong. People end up with narratives that are dysfunctional in some way. We know from cognitive behavioral therapy and clinical psychology that one way to change people's narratives is through fairly intense psychotherapy. But social psychologists have suggested that for less severe problems, there are ways to redirect narratives more easily that can have amazingly powerful long-term effects. This is an approach that I've come to call story editing. By giving people little prompts, suggestions about the ways they might reframe a situation or think of it in a slightly different way, we can send them down a narrative path that is much healthier than the one they were on previously. Little prompts, suggestions about the ways they might reframe a situation. One of the first studies I did after graduate school tested a story editing intervention of this kind. We recruited a sample of college students who were caught in a self-defeating thought cycle where they were not doing well academically. These were first-year students and were quite worried. They seemed to be blaming themselves and thinking that maybe they were one of those admissions errors that just couldn't cut it at college, which of course made it all the more difficult to study. We did a brief intervention here, where in about 30 minutes, we gave them some facts and some testimonials from other students that suggested that their problems might have a different cause. Namely, that it's hard to learn the ropes in college at first, but that people do better as the college years go on when they learn to adjust and to study differently than they did in high school and so on. This little message that maybe it's not me, it's the situation I'm in, and that can change seemed to alter people's stories in ways that had dramatic effects down the road. Namely, people who got this message, as compared to a control group that did not, got better grades over the next couple of years and were less likely to drop out of college. Since then, there have been many other demonstrations of this sort that show that little ways of getting people to redirect their narrative from one path down another is a powerful tool to help people live better lives. Another issue that interests me is that a lot of the existing interventions out there to help people are not based on theory, and even worse, haven't been tested. If there's one thing social psychologists do know how to do, it's how to do experiments and how to test whether an intervention is working, and with good control groups and statistical analyses, seeing whether something works or not. Yet a lot of the current programs in a wide variety of areas have never been vetted in that way and are just based on common sense. There are lots of famous examples. For example, the DARE anti drug program, which my two kids went through when they were in school, period. In fact, 70% of schools in America use this program. It was not tested until fairly recently, and the results showed that not only does it not work, but there's also a hint of evidence that it actually increases alcohol and tobacco use in students. I find it shocking that something that turns out to have a negative effect, or at best no effect, has been implemented in 70% of our schools before we even tested it. Okay. Do, do you know, is, are you new to Earth? There are lots of other examples. Scared Straight programs to scare at risk kids out of a life of crime turn out to increase the likelihood they will commit crimes. Yet, Scared Straight programs are still in use in many communities in the United States. There is a program intended to prevent child abuse called Healthy Families America that has been implemented throughout the United States at a cost of millions of dollars. It turns out to have no effect. Then there's the whole self-help industry, which is interesting because it's not that all of their messages are wrong. It's that they're packaged in a way that give people hope that isn't backed up by science. I tend to think of the self-help industry as kind of like playing the lottery. That is, if we buy a lottery ticket, we're buying hope. We don't really think we're going to win, but for the week before the drawing, we can dream that we're going to suddenly have millions of dollars. Self help books are a little bit like that, where we buy them with a promise that our lives will suddenly be better and all our problems will be solved. We kind of know that's probably not true, but we have a little bit of hope that it will come about. In fact, there's something in that industry called the 18-month rule, that the person most likely to buy a self help book is one who's bought one 18 months earlier. All of this is a little galling to a social psychologist. There actually is some pretty good research on how to become happier and how to overcome personal difficulties that can be done relatively simply, but which the self help industry ignores. For example, my friend and colleague Jamie Pennybaker has developed a writing exercise that is typically done 3 or 4 nights in a row where you write about a problem for about 15 minutes each time. Doing so has remarkable long term benefits on people's health and well being. Therapeutic journaling is the process of writing down our thoughts and feelings about our personal experiences. This kind of private reflection allows us to sort through events that have occurred and problems that we may be struggling with. It allows us to come to a deeper understanding about ourselves with a different perspective on these difficulties. Therapeutic journaling differs from more traditional diary writing, which involves recording the details of daily events. In contrast, therapeutic journaling is an internal process of using the written word to express the full range of emotions, reactions, and perceptions we have related to difficult, upsetting, or traumatic life events. Along the way, this can mean writing ourselves to better emotional and physical health and a greater sense of well being. The therapeutic writing protocol. Therapeutic journaling can be done by keeping a regular journal to write about events that bring up anger, grief, anxiety, or joy that occur in daily life. Hold on. Hey, do we have a printer somewhere? We're supposed to have tons of printers, bro. That looks off. So, therapeutic journaling. Therapeutic journaling can be done by keeping a regular journal to write about events that bring up anger, grief, anxiety, or joy that occur in daily life. It can also be used more therapeutically to deal with specific upsetting, stressful, or traumatic life events. An expressive writing protocol developed by Dr. James Pennebaker is the most widely used and researched method utilized in clinical practice. This writing protocol has been linked to improvements in both physical and psychological health. It has been used in you should be able to follow. It has been used in non clinical and clinical populations. The expressive writing protocol consists of asking someone to write about a stressful, traumatic, or emotional experience for 3 to 5 sessions over 4 consecutive days for 15 to 20 minutes per session. Research has found it to be useful as a standalone tool or as an adjunct to traditional psychotherapies. How it works. Emotional expression has been found to be good for our health. It enhances our immune system functioning. When upsetting or traumatic events occur, we often are not able to fully process what happened, and the event and the emotions around what occurred become stuck in our memory. The simple act of expressing thoughts and feelings on paper about challenging and upsetting events can allow us to move forward by expressing and letting go of the feelings involved. Expressive writing also provides an opportunity to construct a meaningful personal narrative about what happened. That's the most important line so far. It brings clarity and enables us to place our experience into the context of our larger place in the world. Research. Over the last 25 years, Over the last 25 years, a growing body of research has demonstrated the beneficial effects that writing about traumatic or stressful events has on physical and emotional health. Dr. Penny Baker, one of the first researchers in this area, found that writing about emotionally difficult events or feelings for just 20 minutes at a time over 4 consecutive days was associated with both short-term increases in physiological arousal and long-term decreases in health problems, such as immune system functioning. Smith conducted a meta-analysis of 13 studies of written emotional expression with healthy participants and found specific benefits in objective or self-reported physical health, psychological well-being, physiological functioning, and general functioning outcomes. Frazina et al. Conducted a meta-analysis of 9 studies on written emotional disclosure on clinical populations and found significant benefit for health outcomes in medically ill populations, but did not find any psychological health outcomes in psychiatric populations. Who can benefit? Expressive writing has been found to produce significant benefits for individuals with a variety of medical conditions, including bop, 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 bop. In addition, it can be helpful for assistance with specific life circumstances, including breakup with life partner, death of loved one, unemployment, natural disaster, general stressful events. In 2012, Emmerich, Reyentes, and Kamphuis conducted a meta-analysis investigating the efficacy of expressive writing for treatment of post-traumatic stress conditions, e.g. acute stress disorder and PTSD, and comorbid depressive symptoms. It resulted in significant and substantial short-term reductions in post-traumatic stress and depressive symptoms. There was no difference in efficacy between writing therapy and trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. Smith's 1998 review suggests that the effects of written emotional expression are substantial and similar in magnitude to the effects of other psychological interventions, many of which can be time-consuming and expensive. Expressive writing can therefore be considered an evidence-based treatment for post-traumatic stress and constitutes a useful treatment alternative for patients who do not respond to other evidence-based therapies. It may be especially useful for reaching trauma survivors in need of evidence-based healthcare who live in remote areas. Therapeutic journaling can also be a way to reach people who are unwilling or unable to engage in psychotherapy. Expressive writing may be contraindicated for individuals who do not typically express emotions or who have severe trauma histories or psychiatric disorders, so it might not work for my English father. Therapeutic journaling instructions. This writing exercise is useful for dealing with emotional upheavals or traumas. It is a 4-day writing program that has proven effective for improving mental and physical health. It is best to do your writing in a meaningful place, time, and atmosphere, so think about finding a location where you will be undisturbed by others, your phone, email, etc. Okay, I don't know what meaningful means, but undisturbed I understand. It is important to think about what your writing topic will be. You might pick an emotionally upsetting event that is bothering you. If you have faced a massive trauma, it is best not to write about it for several weeks afterwards, as it may be too difficult to deal with some of the emotions that arise around what happened. Trust where your writing takes you. You might start writing about a traumatic experience and then find yourself writing about something entirely different. For the next 4 days, please write about an emotionally upsetting or traumatic event that has had a strong impact on you. During your writing, you are encouraged to explore your deepest emotions and thoughts about this difficult life experience. As you write about this topic, you might tie it to your relationships with others. You may relate it to your past, present, or future, or you may connect it with who you may have been, who you would like to be, or who you are now. You may write about the same general issues or experiences on all days of writing, or you may choose to write about different topics each day. Keep in mind these few simple guidelines recommended by Pennybaker. Writing topic. You can write about the same event all 4 days or different events each day. What you choose to write about should be something that is extremely personal and important for you. Length and frequency. Write for 15 to 20 minutes each day for 4 consecutive days if you can. It is a bit more effective than writing 4 days over the course of several weeks. Write continuously. Once you begin writing, write continuously without stopping. Don't worry about spelling or grammar. This write continuously, that's an important point. If you run out of things to say, simply repeat what you have already written. That's so important because it might be that there's a mechanism that isn't quite done with the thought. So there's like a thought that makes it to your hand, to your language area and then to your hand and it gets written down. And then no other thought comes up and you're like, oh, I don't know what to put next. Just write that thought because maybe you're actually a little bit stuck on that thought, or not stuck. Maybe you need to spend a little bit more time with that thought, and you just don't know that yet. So try to listen to yourself, including your silence, is what I have to say. Write continuously. Once you begin writing, write continuously without stopping. Don't worry about spelling or grammar. If you run out of things to say, simply repeat what you have already written. And then also, of course, that's good to just make sure you keep writing. And that may have been why they put that. Keep writing about the topic until the time is up. Write only for yourself. You are writing for yourself and no one fucking else. After you complete the expressive writing exercise, you may want to destroy or hide what you have written. Remember, this writing can be for your eyes only. I think it has to be, right? What to avoid. If you feel that you cannot write about a particular event because it would be too upsetting, then don't write about it. Just write about events or situations that you can handle now. But I'm waiting for them to say, like, talk to a therapist first. Because couldn't you just write a really bad narrative? I mean, a narrative that's really unhelpful. Oh, yeah, this person really is an absolute bitch. They're out to get me. Bop, bop, bop. Oh, man, I'm so worthless, and this just fucking proves it. Bop, bop, bop. What to expect. It is common for people to feel somewhat saddened or depressed after writing, especially on the first day or two. Know that this is completely normal if this happens to you. Typically, the feeling usually lasts just a few minutes or a few hours. It is a good idea to plan some time to yourself after your writing session to reflect on the issues you have been writing about and support yourself in any emotions that come up. Hey, I gotta go journal. Yeah, it's 15, 20 minutes, but then I need 3 hours to just deal with that. Considerations. Writing about the same topic day after day for too many days is not helpful. If, after several sessions, you feel you are not making progress, then you might need to stop and contact a healthcare practitioner. Section, when to discontinue the journaling exercise. Writing exercises aren't for everyone. If the writing exercise evokes strong feelings that you cannot cope with, stop immediately and do something soothing for yourself. Experiencing symptoms of hypervigilance, stress, or distress are signals to discontinue this journaling exercise immediately. Take care of yourself by doing something like practice diaphragmatic breathing. Reach out to a friend or loved one or go for a walk to center and calm yourself. If you experience lingering negative feelings, you might benefit from some additional help. It is recommended to seek the professional advice of of a psychologist, counselor, or physician to discuss these feelings and experiences. Very good. Very good. I have to pee. I'll be right back. Doing so has remarkable long term benefits on people's health and well being. Researchers such as Ethan Cross and Özlem Ayduk Researchers such as Ethan Cross and Özlem Ayduk have honed this method and, along with Penny Baker, have shown how it works. Think back to the story editing metaphor. What these writing exercises do is make us address problems that we haven't been able to make sense of and put us through a sense making process of reworking it in such a way that we gain a new perspective and find some meaning so that we basically come up with a better story that allows us to put that problem behind us. This is a great example of a story editing technique that can be quite powerful. Let's go back to a basic question that often comes up, namely, what is social psychology? It's a good question because it's something the public doesn't really understand. For example, there was a recent article in the New York Times by an economist who referred to me and my friend Dan Gilbert as economists. Those are fighting words. But in a way, it is our field's own fault that we haven't succeeded in making social psychology more a part of the public discourse. Social psychology is a branch of psychology that began in the 1950s, mostly by immigrants from Germany who were escaping the Nazi regime. Kurt Lewin being the most influential one. What they had to offer at that time was largely an alternative to behaviorism. Instead of looking at behavior as solely the product of our objective reinforcement environment, Lewin and others said we have to get inside people's heads and look at the world as they perceive it. These psychologists were very influenced by Gestalt psychologists who were saying the same thing about perception, and they applied this lesson to the way the mind works in general. The other big contribution of these early social psychologists was a methodological one. There were experiments at the time, but largely on things such as perception and memory. The idea that you could also do experiments on more complex issues about social interaction and social influence was quite novel at the time. Lewin and his students and colleagues such as Leon Festinger, Hal Kelly, Stanley Schachter, and others you use you use rigorous scientific methods to study how the mind works more broadly in a social context. But to be honest, the field is a little hard to define. What is social psychology? Well, the social part is about interactions with other people, and topics such as conformity are active areas of research. Everyone knows the famous Milgram studies on obedience to authority, which showed that a strong authority figure can lead others to shock people to the point of death in their minds, um, in the shocker's mind. There's also a branch called cognitive social psychology, which overlaps with cognitive psychology and research on judgment and decision making, focusing on mental processes that occur in a social context. How does the mind work and how does it make decisions? How do people think about themselves in the social world? Social psychologists have a unique way of looking at the mind, doing so very broadly and considering the role of emotion instead of focusing solely on cold cognition. People like me, Dan Gilbert, and many others are investigating social cognition as a way of understanding how people think about themselves and the social world and how this influences their behavior. For example, Dan and I have been looking at the topic of affective forecasting, which is concerned with the way in which people think about the future and how they think they will react emotionally to a specific event that might befall them. How will we feel and how long will we feel that way if we become ill, or if we have a windfall of money, or if we take this career path, or if we marry this person instead of that person? Many of our most important decisions in life are based on these affective forecasts, whereby we try to gauge how we will feel about an event in the future, especially over the long run. We are by no means terrible at this. Obviously, we have a pretty good sense of what will lead to positive feelings and what will lead to negative feelings, but there are systematic mistakes to which people are prone when making affective forecasts. Perhaps the most common is what we call the impact bias, which is that people overestimate the emotional impact of many events on their lives. We think that if we win the lottery, we'll be happy forever. The research on that suggests that not only is that not true, but if anything, lottery winners become less happy, often because their lives are disrupted in any number of ways. On the negative side, we tend to think that those things that we dread that would be awful, the death of loved ones, the loss of a job, and so on, will make us unhappy forever. Although they are terrible things to endure, we are more resilient than we anticipate and often get over these events more quickly than we anticipate. And why? Because we can rationalize, right? And we don't anticipate that we're going to rationalize, that we're going to automatically, especially if we're mentally healthy, a narrative that may distort what happened, but also makes it more palatable, more acceptable what happened. So you get fired from your job within 2 months, or I don't even know, within 2 weeks. You're already telling yourself and the people around you that it was a blessing in disguise because you were actually unhappy in that job and you just didn't have the courage to leave and start this other thing, but now you do. And regardless of whether or not that's true, it's okay because now you're feeling better and maybe you're gonna try another thing or whatever, and either way, you're not depressed. This research has been picked up by medical researchers looking at treatment decisions that often are very difficult choices to make, such as how to treat a disease when there are various options available. People often choose treatments that they think will lead to the best overall well being and quality of life, but they are not necessarily correct. Physicians struggle with how to educate people that, in their experience, option A may be better than B, but people are convinced that B is better than A in terms of quality of life. Legal scholars have begun to look at affective forecasting in terms of decision making by juries and others. Oh yeah, and plea and like the defendant plea deals and oh wow. I mean, it's everything that has to do with a decision that is going to involve your future well-being. Legal scholars have begun to look at affective forecasting in terms of decision making by juries and others. Well, when the goal is to try to gauge the impact of events on a plaintiff's overall well being, as is often done in civil suits. So they have to so the plaintiff is suing for some amount of damages or, whatever. And the jury's got to think, like, what amount of damages will make this person feel better, or the judge, or whoever. But research on affective forecasting has some life lessons for all of us. I have to confess that I come from a family of worriers. Worriers. Oh, I'm worried. I have to confess that I come from a family of worriers. My family was one of those that always imagined the worst scenario that could happen and ruminated on the fact that, gee, that's gonna be terrible. Research on affective forecasting has been a solace because I know that yes, terrible things might happen, and if they do, it will be terrible at first, but then life goes on. We are pretty resilient creatures, and sooner rather than later, we'll find a way to deal with life's worst blows. Social psychologists think they have something to offer in terms of the discourse on how to solve problems, how to think about many of the issues facing us today. But we haven't done a very good job of making our field part of the discourse with policymakers. Many policymakers, if they're thinking about a problem such as how to increase condom use in Africa, how to reduce poverty in the United States, or how to reduce prejudice and stereotyping, turn to economists. Fucking idiots. Some of my best friends are economists. I don't mean to disparage the field, but they think differently about these problems than do social psychologists. Also, they fucking overstep, bro. And we were talking about this the other day. They fucking overstep. They think they're studying human decision making. They try to just study the markets and the behavior of humans without studying the psychology of humans. Anyway, they think of human behavior as largely governed by external incentives. Most economists don't take the social psychological approach of trying to get inside the heads of people and understanding how they interpret the world. I'll give one example. When economists think about how to solve a problem, such as closing the achievement gap in education, they're like, "Oh, let's offer some rewards if people achieve it, or a punishment. Let's offer some incentive." That's what I'm guessing. And I'm guessing Wilson's gonna be like, I can't. I'm just trying to think right now of what would be a better idea than incentives. Yeah, I mean just something more subtle, framing. Yeah, rather than offering a reward for graduating, frame graduation such that it's already inherently rewarding by tapping into that person's constructs, or the natural sort of goals or preferences or needs or fears that we evolved with. That's what I'm guessing. I'll give one example. When economists think about how to solve a problem such as closing the achievement gap in education or reducing teenage pregnancy, their inclination is to use incentives. What if we pay people to do well in school? Give kids money to study and to get good grades? Or what if we take girls who are at risk of becoming pregnant and pay them $1 for each day they are not pregnant? To a social psychologist, it is a little naive to think that adding external incentives is all you have to do. Not to say that incentives can't work, but they can sometimes backfire if you look at it through the eyes of the person who is getting that incentive. There's some research in social psychology suggesting that external incentives can undermine intrinsic interest in an activity because people begin to think that the only reason they're doing it is for money. And this is called motivation crowding. So there's some research in social psychology suggesting that external incentives can undermine intrinsic interest in an activity because people begin to think that the only reason they're doing it is for the money. That erodes any interest in that activity there was to start with. Now, in defense of economists, they do think big. They think of systems at large, and they are increasingly doing experimental interventions to try to see what works. I'm envious in many ways of the scale at which they are able to attempt to solve problems. One limitation of social psychology is that we have concentrated mostly on basic issues about the mind in laboratory studies, many of them done with college students. There's an issue in how to scale up these interventions to see if they work with society at large. That's a gap we need to fill. and people are increasingly doing so. Taking some of these basic social psychological principles and seeing if they can be scaled up to work more generally, not just in the laboratory with a college student, is an exciting prospect. And there have been some spectacular successes in doing just that. I'll give you one example that I'm very fond of that was done by Jeffrey Cohen and his colleagues. Jeff is a social psychologist who trained with Claude Steele. I don't really know who that is. They trained with Claude Steele and was very well versed in Steele's self-affirmation theory, which is the idea that when we feel a threat to our self-esteem that's difficult to deal with, sometimes the best thing we can do is to affirm ourselves in some completely different domain. Nice. 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 That's good. But Sarah, talk to her about that. If I am concerned that I can't make it in academics, I can take the heat off that concern if I think of something I'm very good at and I care about in some other domain, such as that I'm a family man or interested in politics or what have you. Research on self affirmation theory was done mostly with college students in the laboratory, showing that affirming oneself in an unrelated domain is a powerful way to restore self esteem. That's exactly what I have to do with anybody on my team that I'm working with. So I have to find out for each of the members of the crew something that they're really good at or they that is a source of positive high self-esteem for them. And then just when we're working together and when they're feeling dumb and stuff because oh Eris seems to have all the answers and I don't get it and Eris is probably getting frustrated with me, then Eris can jump in and go, by the way, you know, whatever the fuck. And they're like, oh yeah. All right. So even if I'm feeling weird and, feeling not my best in this conversation, there are times when I feel my best and I'm remembering those now. Great. That's awesome. Where's the notebook? Self affirmation. Affirming oneself in another domain. That's so great. Because so you got some its that are active, that are feeling bad. Don't try to convince those its not feel bad. Just shut them up by giving the floor, the mic, the spotlight to its that are gonna be feeling good. That's great. Just slap those and it'll quiet those. And then the self esteem it will stop listening to the first ones and listen to the currently speaking ones. Fantastic. In another domain. If self esteem threatened. That's fantastic. That's awesome. Um, well, Cohen had the insight that maybe this can be used in middle schools with minority kids, African American kids in this case, who are facing challenges to their self esteem in the academic realm. The negative stereotype that African Americans are not as smart as whites has very damaging effects on African American students because when they are in academic achievement situations, not only do they have to worry about doing well for their own sake, they have this extra baggage of, gee, if I don't do well, I'm also confirming a negative stereotype about my group. This is what Claude Steele has referred to as stereotype threat. So I gotta say something. 2015, right? 2 years after this book is published. And remember, it's 2015. Sure, that feels like 10 years ago now, but in 2015, it was 2015. You understand? It was the modern day, right? And I'm at UIC in Chicago, freshman biology class, because of my spotty academic record. And it's a lab class, so there's just a TA, right? A teacher's assistant, a graduate student. And we all have to give presentations. And this one group gives a presentation on some Alzheimer's research, and they had asked the researcher, in preparation for their presentation, why did you only use like a certain race? Why did you only study a race? Why didn't you, like, why did it matter what race your subjects were? And we don't know what the researcher said. Well, I know what the researcher said because I called the researcher right after this presentation. I was heated. And I also knew that he did not say what they said he said, but I wanted him to know how he was getting quoted, uh, and get him involved in fixing this. So they just straight up said, it was even on their presentation, African Americans have lower cognitive abilities than other ethnicities. Like, just in the presentation. And the most shocking part, not just that they said this, not just that, this Asian kid and these three white kids put in their presentation. The most shocking part was how everybody was like looking at me when I was like, "Oh, hello. No way that a researcher at UIC said that to you." Even if that were true, that statement, no way he said it to some freshmen, to then who were gonna say it in their presentation. So I know that he did not say that to you. Um, and this is a big deal, and we need to nip this in the bud right now. And everybody's kind of just like looking at me like, oh, God, black people, why do they have to be so loud and make such a big deal about everything and make everything about race? I'm just like, what the fuck is going on? What fucking year is it right now? Ended up resolving it. I mean, did the best we could. I gave a presentation about biases and stuff, and also the actual professor, not the researcher, but the biology professor, he gave a presentation about the history of education in the U.S. and stuff. I don't know that either of us mentioned this stereotype threat, but yeah. Other thing I want to mention, that's silly. Well, Cohen thought maybe we can take the research on self-affirmation and use it to reduce stereotype threat in middle school kids. If we can get African American middle school kids to affirm themselves in some domain unrelated to the academic realm, hope it's not going to be like dancing or basketball. If we can get African American middle school kids to affirm themselves in some domain unrelated to the academic realm, as hypothesized, he hypothesized this will take the heat off and make it actually easier for them to do well academically. He did an intervention in which middle school kids wrote about a value that they cared about in their lives, other than academics. They did this for 15 minutes, 3 to 5 times during the semester, depending on the version of the study. That was it. Write about something you care about in your life other than academics. That's even better, because I was actually trying to think, like, you know, gosh, it's not gonna, not everybody has like an easy thing they can reassure themselves with when I'm making them feel stupid by accident. But you don't actually have to, something that you're super good at. It doesn't have to be that, just something you care about, bro. Or talk about something you value in another domain. That's great. That's great. And that will help the cognitive dissonance resolution of like, oh no, I'm bad at this thing that's important. And then you kind of remind yourself, oh, wait, this other thing is important to me. So it's okay for me to be bad at that. You don't even have to think, oh, I'm good at this other thing. Just as long as you say something else is important. Okay, that's cool. This was a good experiment because there was a randomly assigned control group of kids who did not do this exercise. The intervention had remarkably long term effects. The African American kids who did the writing exercise all got graduate degrees, and everyone in the control group killed themselves before graduation, high school, middle school graduation. Wow. I'm just playing. I'm just playing, bro. Oh, it was just zoomed in on Tim. Hello. There you go. This was a good experiment because there was a randomly assigned control group of kids who did not do this exercise. The intervention had remarkably long-term effects. The African American kids who did the writing exercise, the African American kids who did the writing exercise compared to the control group did better academically for the next couple of years. In fact, the intervention closed the achievement gap between the black and white students by 40%. It had no effect on the white kids because they weren't at risk for stereotype threat in academic domains. It seems to have lowered the heat for the black kids when they were in an achievement situation, enabling them to do better. That's one of many examples in which a social psychological principle discovered in the laboratory with basic research can be scaled up to solve a problem more generally in education or other domains. My dream is that policymakers will become more familiar with this approach. So, in a Craig society, obviously, we're fucking talking to psychologists about all this shit, and gosh, anyway. Oh no, this is gonna break as well. Like, that's pretty cool, huh? I love that. I think I look so handsome right now. Anyway, um, my dream is that policymakers will become more familiar with this approach and be as likely to call upon a social psychologist as an economist to address social issues. How about more likely? Let the economist study Homo economicus, and if you have a question about Homo sapiens, ask fucking psychologists. How about that? Now, again, my field deserves some of the blame for this. Historically, we haven't always met policymakers halfway and tried to do more of this kind of work. But that's changing, and social psychological interventions are becoming more and more common. In addition to using social psychological research to inform policy, it can be used to change the way we live our own lives. Something I think about a lot is how my life has changed as a student in this field. The importance of how we frame things and the idea that we have to look at our construals of the world. Well, it's a little unsettling personally because it does suggest that the way we view the world isn't necessarily the correct way or the best way, or that what we're seeing isn't necessarily reality. And that can lead to a little less confidence or certainty about the world and our place in it. But it's not such a bad thing to have a little humility that our view may not be the only one or even the best one. No, it fucking isn't, dude. No, it isn't at all. It's actually even a good thing, bro. Another interesting question is the role of evolutionary theory in psychology and social psychology in particular. I can trace the history of that a little bit. I got my PhD in 1977, and that was just around the time that evolutionary theory was being applied to social behavior through E.O. Wilson's work in sociobiology and others. But it really, at least right away, did not make inroads into social psychology. In fact, in the late 70s, if a social psychologist were to say, I'm an evolutionary theorist, that would have been a really taboo thing to say. It would have struck people as overly deterministic and perhaps even sexist to look at gender differences in social behavior as somehow inherent in the human condition. but things sure have changed. Evolutionary psychology has become a dominant force in the field. There are many who use it as their primary theoretical perspective, as a way to understand why we do what we do. Yeah, no shit, bro. I'll get myself in trouble with some of my colleagues for saying this, but I am not a fan. Well, fuck you then. You're in trouble with Eris. What the fuck? Evolutionary theory has its use. Of course, evolution is true as a general theory of how the human species evolved. As an explanation for current social behavior, it can be a useful heuristic if it can generate hypotheses that we would not have come up with otherwise that can be tested with rigorous methods. But too often there's a very loose kind of okay. It's just like, oh yeah, I'll speculate. Oh, maybe there's this environmental pressure, but I don't really know, and maybe even have no way of knowing. And then I've just come up with a story and I believe it, and now I think I understand behavior. I get that. But too often there's a very loose kind of theorization that goes on, where people just tell a story and assume that it's true because it kind of makes sense. I've been writing this paper in my head for many years that maybe I'll put on paper at some point called Evolutionary Theory, the New Psychoanalysis. Analysis. There are some striking parallels between psychoanalytic theory and evolutionary theory. Both theories, at some general level, are true. Evolutionary theory, of course, shows how the forces of natural selection operated on human beings. Psychoanalytic theory argues that our childhood experiences mold us in certain ways and give us outlooks on the world. Our early relationships with our parents lead to unconscious structures that can be very powerful. But both theories led to a lot of absurd conclusions, and both are very hard to test rigorously. The influence of psychoanalysis waned in research psychology because it was too broad. It made too many assumptions that were very hard to test, and basically, it explained everything. That said, it did actually lead to some interesting hypotheses that were tested rigorously. One example is Susan Anderson's work on transference, which shows that indeed we do have blueprints about relationships that form and influence our perceptions of new relationships. Evolutionary theory, in a way, has the same status. It can explain virtually anything. It can be a useful heuristic, as I mentioned. But at the same time, I think it is way too broad. Another parallel between the two theories is that they both seem obsessed with gender differences. There are many ways that we could think about human behavior, but zeroing in on why women are different from men is something both theories were obsessed with, and both theories have gotten wrong to some extent in attributing differences in social behavior to genetic hardwired influences. The storytelling method is a real problem. In one of Steve Pinker's books, he gave the example that not everything is an adaptation. For example, the fact that blood is red, he says, isn't necessarily a result of natural selection. Well, I could make up a story as to why it is. What if in our very early mammalian history, blood was more brown, but there was a mutation that made it more red, and that turned out to have survival value because if an animal were bleeding, those with red blood would be more likely to notice it and that they'd lick it. Because licking has healing properties, this conveyed a survival advantage, and so red blood was selected for, and blood became red. Am I right? Or is Steve right that the color of blood is not an adaptation? Who knows? The plausibility of a story is not a good way to settle a question scientifically. And this is, of course, this is a heuristic that we all have, the story bias. And it's like, okay, if we have a plausible story, then we have a true explanation. Now, again, in fairness, there are some very interesting hypotheses that would not have come up if it were not for evolutionary principles that have led to some interesting lines of research. But there are not that many of them. One example where evolutionary psychology led to some interesting testable hypotheses is work by John Haidt, my colleague at the University of Virginia. He has developed a theory of moral foundations that says that all human beings endorse the same list of moral values, but that people of different political stripes believe that some of these values are more important than others. In other words, liberals may have somewhat different moral foundations than conservatives. John has previously argued that one reason that political discourse has become so heated and divisive in our country is that there is a lack of understanding in one camp of the moral foundations that the other camp is using to interpret and evaluate the world. If we can increase that understanding, we might lower the heat and improve the dialogue between people on opposite ends of the political spectrum. I didn't really see the evolution aspect of that. Anyway, another way in which evolutionary theory has been used is to address questions about the origins of religion. Yeah, I think we'll just let him. This is not this is not a literature I have followed that closely, to be honest, but there's obviously a very interesting discourse going on about group selection and the origins and purpose of religion. The only thing I'll add is back to what I've said before about the importance of having narratives and stories to give people a sense of meaning and purpose. Well, religion is obviously one very important source of such narratives. Religion gives us a sense that there is a purpose and a meaning to life, the sense that we are important in the universe, and that our lives aren't meaningless specks like a piece of sand on a beach. That can be very powerful for our well being. I don't think religion is the only way to accomplish that. There are many belief systems that can give us a sense of meaning and purpose other than religion. But religion can fill that void. Alright. How long was that? It took me an hour and 30 minutes to read that? No way. That was like 15 pages. God damn, bro. So 15 pages for 6 times. So that's what, 6 minutes per page? Alright. It's not 10 minutes per page, so that's alright. Alright, so 115. Okay, great, big dogs. Great, great. Should we be crazy and just do a teeny bit more reading? So next, we did compassion. We still have to read the script for that. And maybe we can do that with my sister today. And then we have, ooh, I gotta pee. We have relationships. No, I'll just read more later. This is so interesting. I'm excited about reading that. Okay, great. So we will I'm gonna go pee and I'm gonna stop streaming is the point. Let's just see how long this next one. I kind of want to make a little bit more progress. I'm trying to just stay awake. Uh, No, I can go. Yeah, I can go get. I can go get family showered and stuff. So it's not very long. Oh my! After this Susan Blakemore one, we have Bruce Hood writing Essentialism. Oh, and how long is this? Like 15 pages. Well, we don't have another hour and a half to do that. So we're gonna go. But that's really exciting. Bruce Hood. Great. Great, 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 great. That's great. Okay. Bye bye.